Hey class, we're back with another video. This video I want to introduce something called functions in JavaScript. So we've got all this code that we wrote in the last video, and we have a couple of variables and, well, 3 variables here, and some statements that change the variables, and then an output statement here that outputs stuff to the console. So this code just runs when we press the run button in our program. Basically, when our program loads, the browser runs all this code, and then that's it. I mean, it's still running JavaScript, but it's not possible to just trigger this code again without refreshing the browser. So a really common pattern in programming is to take a bunch of code and kind of group it together in a block that we can call whenever we need it. So let's use this jumping example here. So we have a variable called isJumping, and then it changes to true. So let's first let's do this. You know, a lot of times when you're naming variables, if you have 2 words in your variable, you'll just capitalize the second or third or fourth word, every word except for the first one, and that's how you you know, kind of visually create spaces, even though there's no space in the variable. The other thing I'm going to do is just delete this stuff, and I've got the variable isJumping is set to false, and then what I want to do is create a function that allows me to run this line 4, the isJumping equals true, anytime I need to. So what I'll do to create a function, the first thing you need to do is write the keyword function, and then you have to give your function a name. So let's call this jump. Okay, so we have the keyword function. So that's a simple way to create a function in JavaScript, and then we have the name of our function, which is jump. We're going to be able to call this code anytime we want, so we have to have a name to use. Now the thing that comes right after the name is parentheses. These are a space. The parentheses are a space where we can define parameters for our function. That means that functions can take arguments, like we can pass information to them, and then inside the function we can do something with it. But right now we're not going to do that. We're just going to switch our jumping variable to true. That's all this function is going to do. The next thing I need is curly brackets. So we introduced curly brackets in the CSS video, and we said back then that curly brackets are usually used to enclose a group of code, right? So create a code block. And if I press enter, I've got space for my code block. So I'm going to move isJumping equals true up here inside my jump function. So the last thing I'm going to do is return isJumping. So functions can return values back to whatever calls it, and we're going to call this function from the console. So the return statement is going to print out the value for the variable isJumping when we call it. So let's run this, and it's building the preview, and now I can check the variable isJumping, and I can see that it is false. And if I call the function jump, now that variable has been set to true, and I can see there it is. It returned true to the console, because the console is what called the function. If I check the variable again, I can see that it is now true. If I wanted to create another function called land, I could do that as well, and I just use the same pattern. So the keyword function, the name land, there's no parameters, so I'm just going to open and close the parentheses and then use curly brackets. And then down here I'm going to set isJumping to false, and then I'm going to return isJumping, and this is so that our console will show us what happened. Okay, so I'm going to run this, and there it goes. And I'm going to clear the console so that our old output doesn't confuse us. And I'm going to check is jumping. Okay, the value is currently false. Then I'm going to say jump. It returned true. If I check the value of that variable again, I can see that it's still true. And now I'm going to call land. Land returned false. So let's check is jumping one last time. And there you go. It is set to false. Okay, so that's one example of how you can create a function in JavaScript. And it uses the example of the Boolean is jumping, where we're just switching it from true to false and from false to true, and we can call these functions anytime we need. So if you can just imagine you had a complicated program where you had a game and the game had controls, and when we pressed a certain key we wanted the character to jump, and the animation to occur and the physics to change and all kinds of stuff to happen on screen. The variable is jumping would help us to manage that. So we'd switch it over to true because now the character's in the air. This is a different state of the character's movement. And then the function land would be helpful because it would switch things back to false when the character is on the ground. You know, a really simple use for this might be, you know, you don't want the character to, or the user to be able to double jump, you know, so you can, you know, you can call the jump command, but not if you're already jumping. And so you need to check the state of that variable. That's just an example of this kind of stuff in game development. It's way more complicated in practice, but that's kind of the basic idea. Okay, so now let's create another example using a function that has parameters. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete this stuff. I'm going to clear the console, and I'm going to create another function which we already know how to do, and that's we know how to add things. So this function will be called add, and it'll accept two parameters. We'll call it n1 and n2. Okay, so the way this works is I can just define these things, like these variable names right here. I separate them by a comma. And now inside the body of my function here on line 2, I can do stuff with them. They're available to me just like I declared them normally. I don't have to do let n1 equal 6. I can just use it because it's passed to my function when somebody calls it. Okay, so let's return the addition. So we'll say return n1 plus n2. Okay, we'll do a semicolon there at the end and save it. And finally, I want to run it. Okay, so in my console, I can call my add function, and I can say add 9 and 3. Notice I have to use a comma here to separate the two arguments that I'm passing to the function. When I press enter, it says 12. So it did the math for me and it returned the value. If I run it again, but now I say 30 instead of 3, it says 39. So there you go. And now we could try to break this. Maybe we only give it one value, and it says not a number. So this is a problem because I did not pass the argument that it was expecting. And in the body of my code, what I tried to do was add n1 plus nothing. So it came back as NaN, which stands for not a number. So it says you can't do that. What if I try to add 9 and Jeff? Let's see what this does. Oh, it didn't return not a number. It returned 9 Jeff. So there you go. Now you see some of the fun things that can happen with JavaScript. So if you were writing this program and you needed this function to be like really well written, where this kind of stuff didn't happen, you'd add a lot more logic to it. So this is just a basic one for adding things. And we could add another parameter, like let's call this add 3. because we're going to add 3 numbers. So now we can do n3, and we will return n1 plus n2 plus n3. And now when I call this, I can pass it 3 values, and it adds them all up and returns the new value. Okay, so that's another example of functions where we have parameters. Okay, so finally, I think it's time to create a function that can be called from the browser instead of from just the console. So let's save this and clear the console. Let's create a function that says hello. We'll call this say hi, and we will just put your name in here like that, and we'll create a variable called name as a parameter for the function. And what we'll do now is we'll write console.log, and we will use backticks, which is another way to create a string, and we'll write hello. And then in order to embed the variable inside our string, we're going to use $ curly bracket. And this is a new syntax for strings in JavaScript. It's a little bit easier to write. It's less error prone than using concatenation, which is where we use the plus symbol to join text. And what I'm going to include in here is the name. Okay, so name gets passed to this function, and then it says hello name. And I can actually run this and test it in my console, even though I'm going to call this from the browser later on. Let's call say hi, and we'll pass it Jeff as a name. Notice I put quotes around it because this is a string, and it says hello Jeff. It also says undefined because the function did not return anything to the console. I don't have a return statement, so it just returns nothing, or, well, it returns undefined. That's just one of the fun things about JavaScript. Okay, so we have hello Jeff right there. My console.log worked, and it placed the string that was passed to it. It placed it inside my string that was printed out. Right there, it doesn't say name, it says Jeff. Okay, so how can I call this from the browser? That's the whole point, right? Users don't normally open up the console, the dev tools, and start interacting with our program. They interact with it right here on the canvas. So let's create a button in HTML, and we'll say, we'll put some text here that says say hi, and we should see that if I run it. Okay, there it is. It doesn't do anything right now, so I'm going to add an attribute to the button. So this attribute is called onClick, and it's an event attribute. And in the quotes, what I can do is call my function here. Now I need to call it exactly the way it's worded. So say hi with a capital H, and I have to include the parentheses, and I'm going to put my name right here, and I'm just going to put Jeff like that. You see how we have these quotes, and then with these quotes over here? That's a little weird. So what we're going to do is use single quotes. Oh boy. There we go. Okay. Okay, I keep hitting the wrong thing. There. Got it. So we have the double quotes on the outside, and then on the inside we have the single quotes. And now we have this function here, say hi Jeff. It's just like what we typed in a console, but now when I run my program, just clear this out, and I click this button, it says hello Jeff in the console. If I spam it, I keep clicking a whole bunch of times, it keeps saying hello Jeff over and over and over and over and over again. So we could add on to this, we could add layer more and more complexity, but I think this is pretty good for now. We've created a couple of different functions. One that changes the variable, another one that takes arguments that has parameters, and another one that is something we can interact with from the page itself. So we'll do more in the next video with functions and HTML. Thanks for watching.